Carly Schneider.
Here.
Mark Tillman.
Here.
Angie Skilling. Here. Carl Palmer.
Here.
Dave Smith.
Here.
Robin Stewart. Here. Rachel Henderson.
Here.
Dale Lowe.
Here. Okay, quorum has been established. Pledge of allegiance. Pledge of allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Our mission statement: the school district of the Menomonie area, by embracing the unique needs and using the strengths of our diverse community, is dedicated to preparing all students to become lifelong learners, caring individuals, and responsible citizens. Anyone have any requests for changes on the agenda order? Revisions? None? Move on. Recommendations and accommodations. We have one tonight. Not that you want.
Thank you.
Dave Nielsen. School district would like to thank and recognize longtime bus driver for Menomonie Transportation. Dave is in his 9th year of serving the students of the school district of the Menomonie area and has been an instrumental influence to the students of the Wakanda Elementary. Dave goes above and beyond to build positive relationships with students and works tirelessly to help student behavior improve. He holds students to a high ethical standard and devotes his time to helping students understand appropriate behavior and fix their mistakes. Dave enjoys serving the district by taking on extracurricular trips when he is able to and cheer on the Mustangs. And I have to say, as I've ridden your buses over the years to athletic events, I can see that connection with the kids every time there. The players knew you and you knew them well. And it's very well appreciated. Thank you. On to community communications. We have 2 for the evening. First, Jody Bird. You come forward, Jody. State your address, and then you'll have 3 minutes to speak.
730th Avenue in Menomonie. And like you said, my name is Jody Bird, and I am the Public Services Manager at the Menomonie Public Library. And I'm here to tell you a little bit about first grade library tours. So since this is a partnership between the Menomonie School District and the Menomonie Public Library that began in 2016 when first grade teacher Stephanie Steinmeier asked if she could bring all of the Wakanda first graders to the library for a tour. So of course, we said yes. And we developed a program for this. They loved it so much that next year we asked for their heights. No, hold on, to bring their classes. The following year, 2018, we asked for their heights. And then this year, for the first time, we were able to get Knapp and Knoxville to this library for first grade tours. So we're very excited about that. So what happens is a letter goes home to all the first grade parents, and they're given the option of getting a library card. And then the kids come to the library. We do a tour of the library, we read a story, we do an activity. And if they have a library card, or if they've gotten a library card, kids check out 2 books. So they just highlight the whole thing. So, first grade is a great time to partner with the school district on the importance of libraries. It's at the end of the school year, so some of them are reading very fluently, some of them have just had their aha moment, and it's so much fun. But the one thing that the teachers often talk to me about is transportation and getting to the library and how much it costs for them to come. So while the teachers love this safe, fun, educational field trip, one concern with it is the cost of busing. They do their very best to try to work it with other field trips, but it is difficult and they really want to come, but it's just so hard. This year, the reason we had Knapp and Knoxville is because they were able to come in with the 5th graders when they had their track and field day. So they do try to do things like that. So I guess what I'm here to ask about, or who would I talk to, or what would be the next action for me to maybe get this as part of the school district curriculum, so that we can always make sure that there's funding for these first grade tours. If you talk to the teachers, They love it. We've given out 500 new library cards since we started this back in 2016. It's been a really great partnership with the school district. We just want to be able to continue to do that and make it less stressful for the teachers. So making this available for them, making sure they have the money to come to the library is really helpful. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay, and second, we have Josie Tillman.
My name is Josie Tillman, and I live at 835 Third Avenue East, Wisconsin. Dr. Sadowski and members of the board, I was interested to hear a conversation on board last meeting touching on classroom control and what gems our teachers are. I read some of the concepts for keeping our little scholars in mind. And I believe a basic understanding of human nature goes a long way regarding order in the classroom. First, all little human beings are born rebellious. They want to do their things their own way. Kindness, respect, and obedience must be trained into them. It does not come naturally. Second, the younger, the sooner each child can learn this principle of controlling self according to his authorities, the better it will be for him. The best way to teach a young child is to use the board of correction on the seat of understanding. Spare the rod and spoil the child. A 2-year-old responds well to this form of correction. He does not like it, but it teaches self-control. It demonstrates love. Done properly, this kind of discipline does not hurt a child. It must not be done in anger. It must be applied quickly and in the right way, not slapping them in the face and hard enough, and it must be hard enough to be felt. Our culture has been taught that proper discipline is somehow unloving. Quite the opposite is true. A child left to himself does not feel loved. He misbehaves. He will thus disrupt the whole classroom. Our teachers and social workers must accept, quote, all of blueberries, unquote, to quote from Dr. Zadowski. Some children come to us in K4 or K5 completely untrained. The parents do not know that kindness, respect, and authorities and obedience must be trained into their children. Rebellion, disrespect, and meanness must be trained out. They arrive already behind, and the teachers are expected to teach these children and keep order in the classrooms. Often the teachers have their hands tied behind their backs. They're allowed to use the carrot but not the stick. The poor child and the whole atmosphere of the classroom suffers for it. We as a school district need to give our teachers and principals permission to apply the rod of correction when necessary in the younger grades. If the child reaches middle school without being corrected, it becomes more and more difficult for the authorities to teach truth. Here we get the students controlling the classroom. It begins to manifest itself in pushing for such immoral behaviors as furries, unhealthy gender identities, and all manner of LGBTQ sexual perversions. The school district allows us to progress from bad to worse and evil triumphs over good. Truth stumbles in the hallways of learning. We see books celebrating lies being pushed as acceptable meaning to educate our youth. Then is it any wonder that skirted boys are going into girls' bathrooms and vice versa and receiving no correction? Why are we afraid to correct our students? Wholesome policies that encourage character and that form caring individuals and responsible citizens should be welcome. Thank you.
I have to applaud you in one way. You have gotten it down to, you had 2 seconds. But beyond that, I urge you to go home and research Wisconsin State Statute 118.31. And I purposely left this out at the beginning and wanted to read it at the end. The opinions, beliefs, and viewpoints expressed by the various speakers during our communication do not necessarily reflect the opinions, beliefs, and viewpoints of individual board members, the board as a whole, or the school district of the Menomonie area, nor do they reflect the official policies of the STMA. On to the personnel consent agenda. We have one presentation.
I'll second.
Abe and, I'm sorry, Abe and Abe. Good, voice vote. Okay.
Dale Belkey,
Yes.
Rachel Henderson,
Yes.
Mark Hillman,
Yes.
Carl Palmer,
Yes.
Amy Riddle Swanson,
Yes.
Charlie Schneider,
Yes.
Angie Skillings. Yes. Dave Smith.
Yes.
Dominique Stewart. Yes.
Okay, passes unanimously. On to discussion and state accountability report cards.
So I'm not going to give this a long introduction because one, I don't want to steal the thunder from Brian and his team who has helped lead the charge of the building principals and the teachers. But very, very pleased that all the schools in the school district and the school district as a whole either met or exceeded expectations on the Wisconsin State report cards. Brian's going to talk about them a little bit, but we also want to open it up for questions from the board. This is a huge celebration for our school district and something we'll be very proud of. Brian, go ahead.
All right, thank you, Bill. So like Dr. Menomonie said, we have a very, very big celebration as far as the performance of our students on our state accountability report cards. Before I go into some specifics related to the report cards, a real brief history of accountability report cards. State accountability report cards report out on student academic achievement, student growth, student engagement factors such as post-secondary readiness related to student achievement, student attendance, as well as graduation rates. In addition, there is a category that shifted 2 years ago that is identified as a target group score, which takes a look at roughly the lowest performing quartile of students in the school district or an individual building, where there are enough students to have a score that reports in that area. All of that information goes into a formula and takes data from 3 years, when possible, to arrive at one of the overall achievement ratings. And like Joe said, all schools, as well as the district, met or exceeded expectation. Our breakdown, for the first time since state accountability report cards have been given, every one of our elementary schools either significantly exceeds expectations or exceeds expectations. So that's a huge celebration. We've never had a situation where all 5 elementaries were rated at that level at the same time. Wakanda significantly exceeded, whereas our other elementaries exceeded expectations. The middle school continues to exceed expectations and has done that for several years. And our high school has had multiple years of an increase in the overall score since our lowest performance right before the pandemic. So we've seen some really nice gains with our school accountability report cards. Like I said, the report cards bring in data from multiple years, 3 years. So it's important for us to note that one of the years impacting our school report cards for this year's report comes from what I'll identify as a pre-pandemic year. So the year right before the statewide closure of schools to in-person learning. But then 2 years after we returned to in-person instruction. In the spring of 2020, there were no state assessments given across all of the tested grades. We got most of our junior class tested that year, but there were no accountability report cards issued from that year because of the pandemic. So when we take a look, again, we each year we'll go through and we'll analyze the reports and identify what are things that we see that are celebrations and strengths. One of the categories in the report cards is something that's included for informational purposes, but it speaks to the growth score, and it's what's referred to as a value-added score. And the value-added score is a calculation that takes a look at academic growth from 1 year to the next, over 2 or 3 years, when there's 3 years worth of data for a cohort of students. And it adjusts for demographics. So it takes a look at how much growth would you expect to see in a year's worth of time, and then it reports out on whether or not the students made that much growth, more than what was expected, or less than what was expected. And something we've been working very hard on in the district, really, I would say for the last 6 years, is this idea of student growth from year to year to year. Achievement is a target that we try to reach, but we will always have some students that meet an achievement proficiency benchmark and some students that are quite a ways from it. So we really focused on student growth from year to year. And a huge celebration for us is when we take a look at the district as a whole, in the area of math, there are 13 different demographic categories that are reported out in this value-added area. And our students exceeded the state in 13 of those 13 categories for student demographics in the area of math. And in the area of literacy, we exceeded in 11 of those 13 areas. So what that means is I can very safely say that Menomonie is a value-added district. Our students are making more growth than what's expected of them in a year's worth of time. And that's a huge celebration. It's a lot of hard work that our teachers and our students do on a daily basis, and our principals are helping provide that leadership, and our instructional coaches across the district. So when we really dig into that, that's a really important piece.
Brian,
Yep.
I'm gonna let you take a breath, and I'm gonna jump in for a second here. Another measure that Brian and his team look at is a comparison of like districts across the state. And there's 9 districts, including Menomonie, that are considered comparable like districts. And that's looking at the size, the number of students being served, but also the type of population. When we look at free and reduced lunch, we look at the demographics of that enrollment. And, when you look at Menomonie and 8 other schools that are similar to us, closest to us, Menomonie actually scored the highest out of that group of 9. So there's so many positives about this year's state report cards. And granted, there's so much more that our district has to offer, and Brian's going to talk about report card 2.0 in a little bit. This is just one measure that we look at to try to determine student success, but it's certainly something that we feel really good about. Brian, that's my little tip. Did you have anything else you want to add before we open up for questions?
The only other thing that I was going to say about the state report cards is 3 years ago, they added in a category to report out on other areas as far as participation in music and the performing arts, participation in work-based readiness programs, skill certificates. So the state is making steps to get a little closer to what I would consider a comprehensive report card, where it looks at more than just student academic growth and achievement, and starting to incorporate some of those other areas as well. But at this point, yeah, I've opened up to questions related to the state accountability report cards before we move on to that.
I have several questions, but why only math and English literature? Don't they do it on an alternating year?
So the short answer is when the state report cards were designed, they took a look at what content areas are assessed on an every grade level, every year basis for grades that are reported on for this purpose. And English language arts and math are the 2 areas. It also mirrors what's reported for federal accountability as well. Our state assessments in 4th, 8th, and then 11th grade assess science, and in 10th grade social studies is added in the 4th and 8th grade as well. So we do get a state level report for science and social studies for 3 grade levels on an annual basis.
Later.
We have reported on that probably 3-4 weeks ago. 2 or 3. I forget which one it was, but yeah. But we do get those, and I can follow up, Dale, if you have some specific questions on that.
Brian, just curious on so if you look at both, I compared Oakland to Wakanda.
Sure.
So Wakanda significantly exceeds at 83.4, and Oakland 71.7 overall, based on the area weights. But I think to a lot of us, when we were in school, 71 is like a C-, right? And 83 would be maybe a B-. So how is that scaled? Or is that just saying that it significantly exceeds based on prior year, like you were mentioning, a lot of it is based on that. Do you understand my
Yep,
question? Like,
yep.
where are the brackets?
Yep.
Like, is 100 to 80 significantly exceeds, or
Yep,
how
so,
is that weighted?
so the state goes through, and establishes cut scores across the range. The significantly exceeds range starts at a score of 83 and goes up to 100. Exceeds starts at a range of 70 and goes at the 82.9, so that kind of gives you an idea of the rate. And they adjusted that 2 years ago as well. They look at it periodically. This assessment was based off of the Wisconsin assessment. They do some national comparisons utilizing NAEP assessment, which is a national assessment that's given on an annual basis as well, and try to normalize those proficiency levels as well.
Any other questions for Brian? Dale?
So, it's kind of interesting, it doesn't really correspond to, like what you said about our normal grading system, but kind of related to that. You know, each of the schools, except for the senior high, reported, exceeds or significantly exceeds. So I was a little confused by the statistics. How come overall just meet expectations when the only school that was in that category was the senior high? It seems like if you added it all up, averaged it all up, it should be, I don't know, exceeds.
So that's a great question, Dale. When you take a look, okay, similar question?
Yeah.
So, a couple of things. With the state report card reporting system, one of the factors that has a big impact on how much weight is given to growth versus student achievement is the free and reduced or economically disadvantaged percentage that is present within an individual school and then within the district. So if you take a look at the front page of the district's report card, and then you take a look at the front page of each individual building, there's a pie graph that's on there that will show the breakdown of the percentages of the four main categories. And no two of our buildings, nor the district, has the same percentage breakdown of how much it's weighted. And legislatively, it was decided that 35% economically disadvantaged is the quote-unquote magic number for an equal distribution of student achievement to student growth, making up 50% of the overall score. And the further away a building or a district gets from 35% economically disadvantaged, the more heavily it's weighted on growth or the more heavily it's weighted on student achievement. So then when they factor in the district report card, it puts all students in the district into one report as opposed to each individual building. So it changes that percentage. So again, it's one of those calculations, the way that it works its way through the system, the way it's weighted. But the nice thing that we are seeing in the district is, you said we should be very close, or we should be in that exceeds expectation category. If you take a look at the score of the district at 68.8, as far as the score, remember 70 is the cutoff for exceeds expectation. So we missed it by 1.2 points. So we almost exceeded expectations in the district. And if we continue on a similar trajectory of what we're doing right now, and we continue to see gains at the high school, we're not that far from that next category as a district as
Any other questions?
I had a question. And before I ask the question, I just want to reiterate what has been said already. This is really exciting. It's great to be right about. And I plan to do so. One thing I don't see, unless I misunderstand some of these abbreviations, in next steps, I guess looking at sort of the district overall, wonderful news, and as you drill in some of the places where, you know, our scores are the lowest, in particular, like in the growth segment, you see that coming in our economically disadvantaged and students with disabilities. Which I also have a question if that refers to like all kinds of, all disabilities, physical, cognitive, okay. So, you know, those are the places where we see, unsurprisingly, right, the lower numbers and the growth. And I don't necessarily see that reflected in like the next steps. And I'm wondering, yeah, I guess I wonder what you think about that.
Yep, so one of the things that we have currently in place, and Tonya and her team and Tonya and I have been collaborating with a group of staff when we take a look at what we refer to as multi-level systems of supports. And we really started to focus our attention on supports for all students. And part of that is with the target group category, it is not defined by a subset or a subgroup, or I should say an identified subgroup based off of demographics. It's regardless of what label a student might have, it looks at our lowest performing students. So what we really like about multi-level systems of supports is it is supports for all learners, and then targeted supports for those students who need something more specialized. So we do have a team that started meeting at the end of last year, and that work has continued through this year, where we're taking a look at what are some identified next steps related to our interventions and supports. And if you want to put that on an identified next step, please rest assured that's work that's ongoing here in this room. Our next meeting is coming up on the 15th of December.
Yeah, and I know that has come up before, so that makes sense. And that's part of our regular, kind of board report, right? Here, and part of our regular board report calendar. That's it, right? Thank you.
Two questions. One, well, comment. First off, echoing the celebration of what is going very well. You know, a lot of this data is back at levels it was prior to the COVID situation, which is, I think, quicker of a return than many of us thought would happen. So that's fantastic. I think the really important part we should mention, in addition to this data, is that the data didn't change without the staff, the teachers, the principals, the people who aren't in the room right now, working really hard with all those kids. So I think that's worth saying in this conversation, the good that has happened. I noticed, for example, a big improvement in absenteeism in the high school group for economically disadvantaged students with disabilities. So those are relationship-based things, kids wanting to come to school, helping sort out the social problems. So lots of good hiding in this report. You know, I spent way more time than you would think looking at these graphs. But my two questions, the first one is just a definitional thing. What does it mean for an elementary school kid to be on track for graduation? And then the second one is, I noticed that at the high school, we were lower by far than the state average on dual enrollment courses. So those are the two questions I have.
Yep. So I'm going to address the second question first. Dual enrollment, one of the things that we identified in reviewing this report was a coding error for several of our courses at the high school in our student information management system. We've been able to take corrective action with that. Last year's school report card, we were above the state comparable. If those courses had been coded correctly, we would have been on target to be ahead of the state, and we are looking ahead of the state's for that. So that, because it's not something that directly impacts the overall report card rating and overall score, the state identified that as an area that they would not do a recalculation for, because it doesn't change the overall score. It's included in the report as informational only at this point. And then by the December, what's called the December snapshot, which is coming up next week, those things have to be corrected for future reports. So, but that's a good catch on that. The first piece, as far as an elementary student to be on track for graduation. So one of the measures is a student's performance on their third grade ELA assessment. Used to report out on third grade reading, but we know that the literacy is more than just reading words on a page. So it's their third grade literacy or English language arts score. And then also taking a look at chronic absenteeism at the elementary level. In middle school, that translates, I know you didn't ask this question, but middle school translates to 8th grade math and attendance, and then at high school, graduation.
So basically, there's strong academic evidence that these are triggers that if you're not here at this point, you're less likely.
There's a body of research that shows that students not getting at or above grade level by 3rd grade, the chances of them ever reading at or above grade level are very slim. Same thing if they are not performing at or above grade level in 8th grade mathematics. The likelihood of being proficient in mathematics by the time they graduate is very small.
Any other questions, Brian?
If there was one thing you could do to continue the improvement that we've seen. I saw some of the suggestions that you could put all your eggs in one basket, what would it be?
Continue to make sure that our staff have time to collaborate with each other on effective instructional practice, which is something that we build in, we prioritize a professional learning community or PLC process as part of our weekly schedules at elementary, middle, and high school, is to continue to give staff time to meet, review student information, and talk about good, sound core instruction. Because our teachers are the ones that ultimately get this work done day in and day out, and we continue to provide them a venue in which to do that.
Amy?
I like that idea. I also include career educators as well. A lot of them have a good one-on-one relationship with these students.
Any other comments, questions? Abe looks like.
Yeah, just a follow-up to that, those two comments. I think, as I think through, we just finished touring all the buildings in the district, right? And seeing what's different about each one and what they have in terms of their available resources and so on in student space. And it seems like a lot of this report card is really focused on the idea of building students from where they are this growth, added growth sort of way, right? And of course that relies on having the resources and the space to give students, direct intervention and math and reading. One of the things we focus on as we go on these tours is where is their reading intervention work, where is the math intervention work, like that. So I'm highly encouraged by this report to see that things are improving across the board because those interventions are so strong and so effective. And I hope we can find ways to support that even more.
Any other questions now? Thank you, Brian, and I would like to echo what everybody else said as well. This is great news, and last meeting we got great news on the survey. Now this, I guess I'm curious as to what you got next. So let's move on to accountability report cards 2.0.
So when Brian said the state is starting to add more into the report card, but when the accountability report cards came out, that's something that we identified right away that we didn't feel that, the whole child approach we have in Menomonie, we didn't feel it was a great exercise for us just to report out on the academic piece. There's so much more that we do, so much more that our staff does, and so much more experience that our students get in our school district. So a report card 2.0 was developed, and Brian has been tracking, and his team have been tracking different measures, and Brian, you can go ahead and report those as well.
All right. So this continues to be a work in progress. We went and streamlined accountability report card 2.0 a little bit for this year to try and make it a little more user-friendly, to be able to look at it relatively efficiently. But when taking a look at 15 different areas of student engagement, and that's how I'll sort of clarify these. So they're not necessarily related just to an achievement score. There are some things on here that the student has to have a certain level of achievement to be reported in a category, but it's more than just student achievement, it's student participation, and it's student engagement. So we have 15 different categories that we're reporting out on from year to year. And this is a little bit of a shift from pandemic, because one of the things we asked staff to do is take a look and say, are there things that we were maybe doing pre-pandemic that didn't resonate anymore? But these are ones that continued on since that. You can see that of the 15 recorded categories that we have, we saw increases over last year's either student count, achievement, or participation in 12 of the 15 areas, which is really nice to see because we saw decreases in almost all of them coming out of the pandemic, and some of them had limited opportunity for participation. So what I'm saying is we're starting to see students re-engage in several of the types of activities that they were participating in before the pandemic, which is really nice and reassuring to see. A few things just of note. Our AP enrollments last year were down slightly, not drastically, which translated to a few less AP exams being taken last school year. However, we did see an increase in the percentage of students that scored at a 3 or above, which is kind of that watermark for students being able to receive some sort of post-secondary recognition and credit that goes along with that. Our GAC, or Global Education Achievement Certification earned, that was a little bit of a dip. We've seen a couple of years where we've seen some dips in that, so that's something we're going to spend a little bit of time digging into. But taking a look at student participation at the elementary, which we have limited opportunities for what I would call co-curricular activities at the elementary, but we're seeing an increase in those types of things. Battle of the Books, Science Olympiad at the elementary level, things like that. Middle school and high school student participation in student activities, we're seeing nice rebounds in that. And in some cases, I would say we're right back to where we were pre-pandemic with that. And we're starting to see I know we've had a lot of conversation about student behavior and things like that over the last couple of meetings. But what we are seeing is a decrease in the number of students that have what's kind of identified as a threshold 5 or fewer documented incidents. So what that's saying is, the behaviors that we're seeing, while they're there and they're present, it's not the majority of our students, but we are seeing more behaviors with a subset of our student population that are requiring some assistance, things like that. And then another one that I'll point out. Our Arts Integration Menomonie or AIM program just continues to see more participation as we move forward. And actually, that is kind of one of our, what I'll call one of our shining stars coming out of the pandemic. Is we've seen a really nice increase in how we're able to bring in teaching artists and guest presenters from a wider range via virtual participation. Which has really benefited our students and our staff, and we've seen growth at our middle and high school level with AM in the last year. So with that, I'll go ahead and take any questions that people have.
Just to make a comment, I believe the pillars out here were an AIM project.
Yes. It was one of our first AIM projects that we did in the district.
The count for advanced placement enrollment is classes, not students, I would assume.
Hang on a second, I'll pull that back up just to make sure that.
203.
It is, yes. So a student could potentially be counted more than one time because they're in 2 courses. Same thing with exams.
I was noticing though, I'm not sure how this compares to other schools, but it seems like a really good percentage of those AP students taking the exam, which is really great. I have a question, or maybe it's a comment. When I first looked at the 6th through 8 and then the 9 through 12 student activity participation count, I was like, wow, wait a minute with those numbers. But that again is like a student can be counted more than once, which makes sense. I think for like kind of grasping the whole, the kind of like whole thing, it would be nice to see that as a percentage. So in that 9 through 12 student activity count, 1990, 1,991, and then like what does that represent as a percentage of the student body? Is that 75% of the student body participating in something? That'd be really helpful to know. And then I know that this, Chaz, you were saying this has changed and evolved and continues to evolve. So maybe it's not possible to sort of line it up the way that regular report card is and then grid students tracking year over year, but that would be really interesting.
Or even just prior year.
Yeah, I mean, the up and down is really helpful, but
Is that what you're basing the information off? It's just, this is based on the prior year? That's where you're getting the data from?
Yeah, this,
So I would
this one
echo
is a
that.
1-year snapshot in relation to the prior.
I mean, it's great that the majority are green and trending up, but if we could see, like, just take the first one, enrollments are down at 203. Well, that's not a big deal if they were at 205 last year. I mean, that's not a huge red flag. But if it was 350, then maybe somebody would ask why.
We'd like to see some trends over time.
Yeah.
and then like on that same note, like it was 350 last year, but it had been 205 the year before, then maybe we would understand like last year was lit rather than a concern of the drop.
Yeah, I'd like to see that too. That's a good suggestion.
But knowing that, I mean, I think it's great that what you're doing is kind of being flexible and changing this as it goes, to make it make sense for capturing what's going on in Menomonie. So I also don't want to make it harder on you.
Well, just to say, I've been on board for a long time, and same as when it first started, it was pretty minimal, and it's really gone way up. And what we focus on, what we use to do this report card, accountability report card. So yeah, so it's really important, right? I love it.
Anybody else?
Right, move on to the district calendar, 23-24.
This is just continuing the discussion that we had a couple weeks ago. The difference now is that we've actually provided 2 draft calendars for the board to review. We plan to get those out to the staff beginning tomorrow, and then we have QIC meetings scheduled the week after, so a week from today. And we look forward to getting input from the QIC groups after they've talked to their colleagues about the different options. The 2 options that we provided for, one is very similar to what we've used the last several years. Both options include a spring break that's aligned with UW Stout. The big difference is that in the second calendar option, we've taken some of the extra time, the extra instructional time that we discussed a couple weeks ago, and we've actually put that into student days prior to the school year, and then extended some of the breaks to make the calendar a little more friendly for our teachers and staff. I do want to point out that in both calendar situations, we're recommending moving the professional development day out of January and into February. It always is interesting to have a long winter break and then come back for a week or a week and a half, and then boom, you have another day off for professional development day. We think that would be wise to move that out of January and put it into February. I should note though that Martin Luther King Jr. Day has typically been the day when we have that professional development. I actually think it'd be better to have school that day because I think there's wonderful activities and learning opportunities that could be held on that day. But it could be viewed as some as not favorable. But I do think it could be a very good day in our school district. Other than that, the 2 options there. It's going to go to the staff. It's going to be discussed next week. Any other comments that board members want to make before it comes back to you in 2 weeks?
So where did the extra days? Where did the extra days on the second? I was trying to like crosswalk, and I can't tell where the extra days off got put in there for the extra.
No, he's talking about the days off. Think the Thanksgiving week would be the biggest, probably, November 20th and 21st. Our enrollment is usually low with a lot of absences. Also, the winter break would be extended to include January 2nd off instead of coming back the day after New Year's. And then I believe, those would be the 3 days.
Thank you.
I would just like to commend you on the fact that you have kids in there and not Martin Luther King Jr. Day, because there's so many cool things that can be done and activities being that kindness and all that kind of stuff. I know the community sometimes does stuff, but it's great to have schools do something.
Thank you.
So both of these,
Quite bad.
both of these calendars will go to staff for discussion, is that what you were saying?
Yes.
Okay, so we'll learn by the next time what their feedback was,
Yeah.
or which ones occurred.
Yes.
Okay,
Well,
or,
it'll be split,
yeah,
but
sure.
we'll have feedback to share.
Okay.
That basically, that's the question, are we gonna have, like, data that tells us what?
We're not gonna put out a vote.
Okay.
We're gonna take feedback and then provide a recommendation based on the feedback.
And I think it's very easy, will be, Carl might argue that, there'll be probably some good discussion about what the pros and cons are, and sort of qualitative in that sense.
Right. Right.
So, what are the big negatives, the big annoyances, or the great things about each calendar, right? So,
You'll come. Well, yeah, so it was similar to both of those, I was just concerned how the decision was gonna be made. Because you can see input being very across the board. The decision that we made by vote of the board, correct?
Well, yeah, the board will ultimately decide. We will provide a recommendation based on what we think is best, considering families, students, staff, everybody. We'll get a pretty good opinion from the staff next week. See what they
The
do.
union used to be able to make the calendar.
Excuse me?
The union, teachers union used to, because that's owned by
Yeah.
Act 11, or Act 10, I'm sorry. So that's why we get one on hand.
Other than us talking to the community, are there ways to gather input from families, building schools? I know it's a very broad decision because it affects someone's life in very different ways.
Right. I mean, I can tell you that, you know, what was it, 7, 8 years ago, we did a survey and it turned into a disaster. I would not recommend doing that. I think as a board, you're elected to represent the community. And I think it depends on who you talk to. If you talk to families who are hunting, they're gonna love option 2. If you're talking to people that wanna get done as quick as they can, you know, start as late as possible and get done, they're gonna prefer option 1 probably. I mean, it all depends on what perspective you're looking at.
Have you studied the budget impact of either of those options?
Yeah, well, I mean, I can tell you that that's one of the reasons why we're recommending that calendar 2 as an option, is that allows us to increase our enrollment for summer school. And I know we talked about that a couple weeks ago. And schools around the area are doing that. More small schools, I would say, and more schools that are going through severe decline in enrollment. But we've had some changes in our enrollment as well. And to Charlie's point, yeah, I think there is a budget impact that the board will need to consider.
And when you say that, then the option 2 is better.
From a budgeting standpoint, I would say yes.
Will you be able to quantify that for us at that time or not?
I guess Lee and I can try to spitball a little bit.
I guess I'm not necessarily asking you. I'm not necessarily asking you to quantify it, I'm asking if you will have it or not, that we can plan on it. If it's this one's better, but we don't know how much, maybe that's as good as we're gonna get, and that's fine. Or you know, this one's X dollars better.
So you'd like to quantify it.
I didn't say that. I asked if you were going to quantify it.
Well, I think I kind of did.
If that's what I'm asking for, is that what we're going to get, that's fine.
Yeah, we can get you a little better spitball. All right, what you got tonight?
I think the absenteeism during, because I know my daughter missed Monday, Tuesday, because we're hunting family, would be improve our absenteeism rate, so it'd be interesting to know how bad it was in the absenteeism. So I think a lot of families would like to have that. And I know some of it last year during COVID was kind of a relief because there was such a buildup for this semester. So I think some people missed it this year. I like the schedule too, but the most recent.
Somebody else?
But the second plan also was shorter, so look at, earlier in June, too, didn't it?
It's just a one-day difference.
It's pretty close.
Okay, just one day.
Yeah.
2 days.
Has it been talked about at all with teachers about what that those jumpstart days look like? Have they talked about how they feel about having them?
The principals have talked, and they've had some discussions with the teachers. It'll be interesting for us to hear from them. We have our lead team meeting tomorrow. I think we'll also hear about that at the QIC meetings. I know the big concern that I heard was, especially in the upper levels, but I think in all levels, as long as they can be going with school year activities, school year curriculum, regular stuff, it would be okay. But if they're expected to come in and teach some sort of summer school lessons, then it could be problematic. But our intent would be to go.
Which may be problematic, because it's hard not to come in at that.
Right.
point. They're already steering behind.
Right.
So it's gonna have to be some kind of balance.
Our intent would be to go. To get started with the school year.
How does that, I think you addressed this last night, all this, I forgot this. How does that align with the state regulations on starting after September? It actually means
Well, that's where it gets a little tricky, And when I say go, we talk a lot, the first 3 days are establishing routines and things like that. So yeah, I think there have to be some sensitivity there.
Okay, any other questions, comments on the calendar? So we'll see that at the next meeting.
Yeah, you could expect on the action agenda the next meeting, I would think.
And on to the budget plan and timeline for 23-24.
So I appreciate Leah putting this together. This is a timeline that has been used very successfully in the last several years in our school district. Leah has gone through and just kind of updated the plan for the 2023-2024 budget. I don't know if board members would like anything different, if you'd like anything more detailed, any changes that you might have to this timeline, but it has worked pretty well in the past. Leah, is there anything you want to add before we open up the questions? Anything?
It's the song that never ends, really.
Well, it is. It starts in November, it ends in November.
Any
Appreciate your hard work.
Yes. Any other questions or comments? New course proposals for 23-24.
So speaking of timelines, a few meetings ago, Brian brought forward a timeline when we talk about course proposals, staffing, everything. And one of the steps of the timeline is what we're dealing with tonight. So Brian, why don't you go ahead and discuss where we're at with course proposals?
So we do this on an annual basis, and some years we have several new items. This year, we have a new program that we are proposing, as well as one new course at the high school level. And then a few items that are included informational, things such as name changes, opening or changing prerequisites, things like that. Really fall under just informational, that wouldn't require board approval. But the first, we are proposing a new program as part of our partnership with Chippewa Valley Technical College. For board members that were part of the board, we started our Business Management Academy, which is a dual enrollment partnership that we have. Something very similar to that format in a pre-nursing healthcare academy. And this really is a logical next step because we do offer several of the courses that a student would have to take to fulfill this pre-nursing academy already at the high school. One mainly being a CNA course. But by formalizing this partnership with CVTC, students would have the opportunity to complete all the prerequisites for a nursing and other health programs offered at CVTC while they are at the high school, allowing them either a jump start on the wait list or direct entry upon graduation. Typically, as students upon graduation and being admitted, they need to wait about a year to get into one of the nursing programs. and if the student fills these requirements during their junior and senior year, then that next year they'd be able to go directly to that. And students would earn dual credit, meaning CBTC credit and high school credit at the same time, and they would graduate with an initial certificate as well. And question?
What is the capacity at CBTC? So the delay in nursing is often that there's not enough faculty and there's not enough clinical sites to go into the hospitals and learn how to do the nursing stuff. So does this mean that essentially that student junior year gets on the list essentially in front of someone in the community who's waiting that full 2 years? There's no additional capacity of the nursing school, is that correct?
So, yes and no. The wait would happen during our students' senior year, but one of the things that CBTC is doing is they are building a lab at the Menomonie campus to increase capacity. Similar to the partnership that they have with Mayo and Osseo, where students go to the Mayo campus in Osseo to take courses. So they're working on expanding capacity and finding additional instructors. And part of that is working with Mayo to help to, once students complete and have their certification and turn 18, for the potential of being hired on as a Mayo employee. So I'm not a guarantee, but increasing that option.
That's the nurse assistant
Yep.
part. That was not, so it's not the nursing part, it's the nurse assistant.
So this is one of the ways that in the community we're trying to help alleviate some of the backlog while also increasing some capacity in an area that there continues to be a very large or high demand for individuals with certification. And we were pretty close to having students be able to do this already. This allows us to fill in those holes that we haven't been able to do with our faculty because we don't have people that have the right certification. And the reality is we probably wouldn't have somebody on staff that possess that certification. So see this very nice win for our community and for our students. So then,
Related to that, does participating in a program like this help CDTC get the resources that they need to build that, to increase that capacity?
It does. It allows CBTC with local districts, not just our district, districts support to pursue general purpose revenue grants from Department of Workforce Development, moves them higher up on the scoring scale to do that, which then allows, if the current grant that they're going after is approved, it actually provides a tuition rate for the cost that as a district we would pay for participating in these as part of our Start College Now program. The options that our kids already have, but it gives kids to the front of the line sooner.
So a follow-up to Rachel's question. So the question tonight kind of sketched out my first question. This was okay. Staffing, supplies, transportation. So how are those being covered?
Yep. Okay. So staffing for courses that we don't offer with our faculty, CBTC provides the staffing. So they have to find the staff. My understanding are well on the way to being able to staff this for next school year. As far as the supplies, that's part of the cost of the program. So that's shared between the grant, the district, CBTC. As far as transportation, right now, the transportation for the students, once they complete classes on site at Menomonie High School, if they are going out to clinicals or when they have to go to Menomonie campus for CPTC, that would be a student expense at that point. There have been some times when there have been some grant dollars that have been available for providing gas cards, but that's not an absolute year in, year out. That's something that sometimes has been able to be part of these grants and sometimes has been, quite honestly, potentially excluded from the grants depending on where they're from. One of the reasons why looking at starting this now as opposed to a year or two ago when we were initially having conversations is students would have to either go to Chippewa Falls, Oxford, or the Eau Claire campus. So getting something on site here in Menomonie, either at the high school or at the Menomonie CTC campus, was really a need that we have.
So let me just repeat what I heard, so I make sure I understand it and on the right page. So, so staffing is handled by CBPC and probably covered by grants will help, basically, in some sense, we are a bonus check mark on their grant applications, so to speak, right? Supplies are already cost shared as appropriate as part of the program, and transportation is primarily on the students.
And what I will say is, as far as staffing, some of the courses that students take will be taken at Menomonie High School, taught by Menomonie High School faculty as well. Yes.
Brian, my question kind of follows up on that. Some of the courses being taken, like it says, for instance, that anatomy and physiology will be taught by CBTC faculty in Menomonie at the campus. Menomonie High School, anatomy and physiology doesn't count.
So up until this year, it would have counted. There has been a change in, at the college level, they used to allow what was referred to as an advanced standing course versus a transcriptive credit course. Advanced standing is something that has been phased out at the technical college system for dual credit. It has to be transcriptive. We could offer a transcriptive course at the high school here in Menomonie if the instructor possesses the correct certification to not only teach at the high school level, but also at the technical college level. Our current instructor does not possess that certification. We have some faculty that have that certification for those dual credit courses, just not in that course. It is a topic of conversation as to what would it take to have that instructor have that certification. However, you have to both have an instructor who either has that or is willing to pursue that certification in order to do that.
You mentioned the nursing program in Eau Claire currently has a London semester. I assume that means UW Eau Claire. Okay. When I looked at it, things that have to be completed in order to get on that wait list by the end of their 11th grade year, and I looked down the list of courses that have to be completed. Did that strike you as being nearly impossible? So if there are any other requirements for Menomonie High School, and I'm sure there are.
So for students who know going into their junior year that this is a path that they want to pursue, we do have students at a pathway for them to do that, either through the school year or through some summer coursework. In addition, a student, if they don't fulfill all those courses by the end of their junior year, to be at a point where they can be on that wait list, a student can also complete this during their senior year. And what we know is while the wait list in Eau Claire is 1 to 2 semesters, the wait list in Wood Falls is, for the last couple of years, has allowed for either no wait or a 1 semester wait. So we're kind of in a nice geographic location where students want to go to Eau Claire and they fulfill that requirement. They may not have as long of a wait, or if they want to go to Wood Falls, they're for the last 2 years has not been that long of a period. So there are options for students who may not necessarily know going into their junior year that this is a path that they're interested in. But we also know it's been a very popular program for us, for our students, with a large number of students who have expressed interest in doing this, which is one of the reasons why now is when we're pursuing it. Because we've shown we've had that demand for a few years.
We've kind of interrupted you as you've gone through it. So, what do you need to cover?
As far as the pre-university healthcare academy, moving down the list, in our music department, they are proposing one new course, a course called music theater. The department has looked at it, high school admin has had a chance to review it, and I've had a chance to review it. Feel it matches, really the direction the department is looking to go, the staffing. You'll see down under the informational items within the music theater department, they're actually looking at eliminating a course by instead of having two separate courses, I should say they're looking at merging a course that's had lower enrollment. So at the end of the whole process, it actually comes out to be a net wash as far as the number of courses offered in that department. And then you'll see that there are a handful of updates in technology engineering, looking at making the name change to try and help make it a little more applicable and appealing to students by changing the name. Social studies department, a few years ago, probably about 6 or 7 years ago, we added a new course that was called Intro to Social Studies based off of some needs that we were seeing as far as some specific skills that students were needing. We've been able to see within the department, they've been able to address those, but then taking a look at state assessment in the area of social studies, wanting to be able to get a little deeper with some of the content, with U.S. history, making some shifts within that intro course and the existing U.S. history course. So that we're recommending that name change there. Music theater change that I alluded to earlier, our math department, looking at adding in Algebra 1 as a summer school offering in a accelerated format for students who want to get to higher levels in mathematics. So we'll provide that opportunity. And then the English language arts department last year piloted a young adult literature course based off of feedback throughout the course of the year as part of the program review, looking at adding in to that young adult literature course on an every other year basis, a rotation of really 4 different topics, as opposed to just having the class referred to as young adult literature, based off of surveying their students and feedback as they've gone through that process, trying to help students better identify in the front end what the focus of the course would be on a rotating basis. So again, just some informational items there. So, again, all of these items have been reviewed both by the departments and high school admin who recommended to me to move forward. I've had a chance to follow up, and at this point in time, this is what we're looking at as far as updates going into the registration process for new school. Yes, Amy.
Will it be a prerequisite, for one in the summer?
Can you say
A
that?
prerequisite for them, I mean, certainly eligibility requirement, because I know in the past, when students want to accelerate and take classes in the summer, it'll be like a part of the Get to the Talent program or something like that.
So that summer Algebra 1 course, we were looking at a grade of B or higher in a grade. And teacher recommendations.
Oh, and the other comment I'd like to make is, you've got a pre-nursing academy, how about a pre-teaching academy, since we're.
So it's been discussed, and there are some models out there. We've tried to be very strategic and purposeful when we bring forward academies, because they're a lot of work and they require a lot of pre-decisions, I guess is kind of the best way on the part of students, because they start pretty early in the student's
Yeah, well, I don't deny it, but I was thinking about that for our
Absolutely. Yeah. There are a couple of models out there.
The change from intro social studies to U.S. History 1, I was curious how significant you feel the curriculum changes are there. I'm not going to details of that particular course history, right? So is this really exclusively a focus on U.S. history, and is that what it was before, or was it more about contemporary issues or global issues and so on before it became U.S. history?
So there absolutely was an element of a survey course to it, and there still will be that component. But what we have found in taking a look at our student performance on our state assessment is to be able to cover the periods of history that our students are seeing, and also cover current events before civics in 11th grade. A nice way of putting it is we continue to have more history to cover. But there still will be an element of the 5 disciplines of social studies. And that's across all of our social studies courses.
Small question about the combining of the theater and music, whatever that was.
Yep.
I assume no problems if you have a student who's really focused on music, theater, performance, when they go to apply to an art school, fancy one, right? You would know more than I which ones they are, but that's not going to be a detriment that they don't have 2 separate courses with those contents versus one.
Not a question specifically that I asked, however, in talking with the staff at the high school, they feel that this is a good way to make sure that students get access to both, because for the last several years, when we come to back to the board to ask for permission for courses to run with enrollments of less than 15, these 2 courses are ones that on an annual basis are both being asked to run less than 15 kids level. So the current faculty feels that this is a good way to continue to offer both of those courses, both that content for both of those courses, and not have to potentially cut one or the other.
The issue was missing because it was 2 more often than it was.
Any other questions or comments? All right, thank you, Brian. Moving on to the library media plan.
Go ahead and keep rolling.
All right. So I have Kim Navarro and Jessica Graham, our SPMA library media instructors with us. Kim serves as our director, and Jess is our elementary library media teacher. A very brief history, and I'll emphasize brief history on library media plans. Library media plans are required by statute that districts have them in place and that the board approves them. There is not necessarily a statutory requirement on the frequency at which boards review them or districts review them. However, it has been a long time since we have reviewed ours. At one point in time, they were merged with tech plans. They have since been separated. However, the statutory requirement for a library media plan continues. In taking a look at the previous one, it was a historical document, and it served its purpose for a long time. But since then, the Department of Public Instruction has recommended following what's referred to as the Future Ready Library Framework, which is part of the overall Future Ready plan, which breaks the library media plan into 8 areas. And you can see the bulleted list in the board docs. Kim and Jess have done a very nice job of going through each of those areas, taking a look at our existing staffing, our existing collections, our existing resources, and really making some recommendations as to things that we want to continue to do and do well, and some areas to look at over time. My intent would be that annually, probably in July, we review our Ed for Employment plan. We bring back the updates that are recommended for the board to take a look at. That way they don't become 5, 10, 12 plus years old as far as the plan. So we'll review it on an annual basis as a staff, but then take a more comprehensive dive, just like we would any other program review every 6 years. So what's in front of you is the first outline. This would then come back at the next meeting for approval. And the intent behind the library media plan is to keep it somewhat nimble, keep it structured around the Future Ready framework, and tied to our district strategic plan. So with that, I'll open things up to questions. I'll probably defer many of them to Kim and Jess.
It's really well done. Does anybody have any questions?
I read through it this afternoon and it's really well done. And I especially like in part of your mission where your vision where it says not just reading, but creators of information. I just think being creative and things like that really helps kids develop and grow and learn. It's fun for them. And I think making things fun for our kids, where we move back to get everyone to get attendance back in this post-COVID kind of thing. So I thought that guys did a great job. I love that.
First, I want to say thank you so much for coming to this meeting and waiting so patiently. I love Great for this. I love our libraries. I love librarians. You guys are so great. Thank you for all the work. I have one question. In focus area, great digital resource tool. I think I understand the intent of the sentence, but develop in the actual sentence, develop and schedule diversity audits that address all marginalized groups besides race. I think that is meant to make sure that we're including marginalized communities that are not just race. But when it says besides race, like, I'm just not sure that that little piece is like necessary, because it sort of sounds like separate and there's a lot of intersectionality. So that was just the one thing that kind of stood out to me. That we just all marginalized groups. Can I address that? Yeah.
Part of the reason why we did that is because it was a recommendation from staff. Because when you see diversity, that word diversity, the first thing that comes to mind is race, and that's it. And we wanted to make sure that we addressed all marginalized groups, not just race and ethnicity. So that's part of the reason why that is in there, but you are correct, we could probably word it a little bit better.
Thank you.
I was just gonna, in fact, I just read where the library is getting a whole bunch of money and all that.
But common school funds?
Yeah. So how is that gonna help with this plan, or is that just a separate thing?
Well, Brad, go ahead.
Yep, so common school funds is, the common school fund is the main funding source for our libraries in the district. So each year, we get our initial estimate, staff build a budget, and then once a revised number comes in, what the actual number is, then the staff then revises the budget. The nice thing about having a plan like this that's current and updated is that will help inform purchasing decisions related to goals and next steps that are identified.
Right, is that a sizable increase that I read about? I'm trying to remember what the.
I want to say it was the highest it's ever been.
Say it again.
It was the highest it's ever been.
That's what I thought I read. Can that be used for staffing?
Common school funds.
But
So I think this is involved in many of these focus areas. But I think one thing that we noticed here in the schools is how much the library space is often used for intervention time for individual students. Sometimes the corner kind of separate off, almost as used as a office or storage space, things like that. So I think recognizing the I'll be curious to see how this plan kind of helps integrate some of that flow with resource management and space management, because I think it's a library is often a common space, it's a space where groups work together. It's also a space which is so flexible and so powerful that you can do very effective individual interventions. I think balancing those two is quite a challenge, as you know extremely well. So I think that's something that I think we should keep in mind as board as I kind of think about how can we make sure that both of those have the resources they need. An actual question though, beyond that kind of dialogue point. I'm curious about, based on the public comment we had earlier by Jody, how the regional public libraries integrate with the library plan at the schools. There's obviously a lot of interaction.
I guess I would say on a minimal level, we're talking about building foundations of literacy, and that partnership starting out at a very young age is pretty important to both us and the public library. Does that answer your question?
Yeah.
Any other questions?
I had a question about the professional development. I really got pretty excited about that. And plans in here, it sounds like part of this, and again, I recognize it's maybe somewhat long-term thinking about ways that you're working across the elementary level staff, or I guess I saw this in the case, okay, use across all staff, so like using those library resources, digital resources, like incorporating it throughout the school day. I'm curious about like how much of that is happening right now, or like how much of that is brand new going forward.
Well, we have digital resources that have been available for a long time. I think in the last couple of years, we're really hitting hard at the elementary level of establishing like how to use our catalog and how to use our e-readers and those types of things. And we're kind of building upon that as they go through middle school and on to high school. There's definitely room for improvement, those being used obviously, but we really do try to implement that in our lessons that we provide. And so hopefully we'll see a lot more use of that.
And I'd also add in there that in our plan, we have that we would like to reevaluate some of those resources on a more ongoing basis. So we don't purchase one resource and just pay for it and have it for 10 years. Like we want to make sure that it's used and valued and useful for teachers and students.
Any insight into high school library, because that jumped out at me, right? They have almost double the kids of the middle school and the high school. Nearly as much funding as the middle school, but the circulation was 4,100 versus 10,700 last year. And then, so I get that, I mean, I expect that, right? Like, you go to a college library, there's almost no books in it, everything's online, right? So what is the next 3 to 5 years of a high school library look like? And does it take the same dollars, and what gets kids to go in the library?
Well, at the elementary level, there is quite an excitement. Library Day is awesome, and it is actually scheduled into their weekly schedule. As they move up through middle school and high school, that kind of tapers down. Me personally, I try to work with teachers at the high school level to get kids to come in. We're seeing more teachers bringing their kids in to do like a checkout, but it's not actually scheduled, and I don't have access to the kids as easy as I did when I was working at the elementary level. It is part of my plan is to get them in there more often. So I'm in the process of just talking with teachers and staff and trying to develop a more flexible schedule.
I mean, I get the whole you can lead the horse to the water thing, right?
Yes,
So,
exactly.
is it an issue that the kids just don't have time to read with their, like they used to, or if it's not their hobby? I'm just curious to see how it goes. I'm not being critical. This doesn't surprise me at all.
Not to make it, they have less free time to come to the library. At the library, at the elementary level, we have 30 minutes that they come in and there's a lesson and they check out books and they'll get 3 books, whereas a high school student might check out 1 book every 2 weeks.
Sure.
So those circulation levels, they're going to be very different. But yeah, you're right.
You're reading one this thick.
Yes,
versus
exactly.
14
So it does take a little more time versus,
Yeah.
a little bit.
Thank you.
Dale?
I applaud you for the great report. It was very well done. I'm sure it's a lot of work. I have a question about the training or the credentials of the clerical staff that is in place in each of the libraries. Do they have any library media training?
I can start and then fill in. So for the hired position is not a requirement. Most of the training that our library media clerk will receive would be from our library media staff. An exception to that would be our staff that help with cataloging. There are specific courses that they have to take in order to do that. And then they work very closely with both Kim and Jess. Anything to add?
No, I think it's well.
Well, okay. I'm going to share some little research. As soon as I read this on the agenda, kind of hit a hot spot and did a little research. I'm going to be sharing it, we'll be getting it within 24 hours about the need for certified librarian staff and the need for additional specialists at both elementary and middle school, high school levels. But well, I guess I'll just keep it short at that. One of the things I just wanted to highlight was that the research showed that, like with our scorecard that we talked about at the beginning of this meeting, that scores went up, especially with economically disadvantaged students that had full-time library certified staff. And I thought that just kind of jumped right out at me. That's something that would really help our scores. And so I'll be sharing that with you. I hope it's good reading for you.
I have one more question. And this is just me not knowing this, I'm sorry. So like the public library, if you have your card, like you have access like Libby, like online thing, and do we have like that sort of option for kids?
It's called Sora.
Sora?
Sora, S-O-R-A. It's just an online program, and we purchase ebooks and audiobooks and magazines.
Works very, very similarly to Libby.
Any other questions, comments? Gail, I'll be interested to read that. The one thing that I thought of when Carl was asking his question about the high school is, the high school age kids theoretically anyway have a much greater ability to have electronic media, to be able to read a book on a Kindle and those kinds of things, so they don't need to come into the library necessarily for those kinds of things, check out a book, like a third grader that doesn't have the ability to almost anything now. But I guess question for you ladies, how as electronic media and those kinds of things continues to take over, how do you change what you're doing in this plan 3 to 5 years to keep that space relevant? Your job is very relevant in teaching those kids how to use the research and all of that. How do you keep that space in the older grades, especially? I wonder what's a library or an IMC going to look like in 5 years at high school?
It's a good question. Actually, a few years back, that was a major question when ebooks and audiobooks came about. People thought that libraries were going to become non-existent. What we're seeing is a lot of kids still like print. They don't usually gravitate towards the ebooks and audiobooks. I've offered ebooks to kids when they can't find it in print. I go, if you have it on Sora, like, oh, I like the book instead. So I don't see that trend being extremely so hard hitting that we're going to lose that space or that relevance. But yeah, I don't think that's going to be much of a problem.
Just a couple extra things to add there. I will say at the elementary level, we actually use that technology with our print books. A lot of times those books are more difficult for the students to read, but they can follow along with it if they're listening to it on a playaway or in a wonder book. So we actually find that pretty beneficial and works well with our checkout numbers. And as far as what the library looks like, that's part of the reason that we have attending events at CISA and WITA, because we learn about those new and upcoming trends that are happening in the library, and we get to learn from other people what's working and where maybe the library is going, and then bring that back to our district.
All right. Anything else on the library meeting plan? Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Legislative advocacy. Carl, or excuse me, Dave, you want to tee this one up?
Sure. First, I apologize for making the agenda longer. So this idea was kind of formulated while sitting through some of the law meetings we went through recently. There was, of course, the regional meeting several weeks ago over at the Scottsdale House, and then there was an online
advocacy workshop or kind of seminar that they ran about a week and a half ago. And, WASB is, their role is to keep school boards around the state, have good communication and aware of what matters on the state level to all schools simultaneously. And one thing they're really stressing, and I think they're right in doing so, is the importance for schools and school boards in particular. It's not only the role of teachers or even necessarily administrators to some extent, to advocate on behalf of the school district what the school needs, right? To advocate for communities and anyone else that's relevant. So WASB has some guidelines on legislative advocacy, and kind of thinking through them, I kind of just drafted this up as something to discuss and decide if we want to move forward or not. There's 3 attachments in the administrative content here. The one I want to draw your attention to first is proposal for legislative advocacy committee, which is the second one. So this is formulated as, if we want to do advocacy, and by this what we mean is talk to the legislature, talk to the community, and explain what the financial needs are of the district and how the legislature and the community can help. The legislature in particular, of course, they really control our entire budget in a very strict way, we all know. And so, there's various ways a board could do this. We could do it as a body. We could appoint some point person. But I think it seems to me that the right balance is to have some sort of subcommittee, which is small enough that it's not a quorum, and can kind of act and bring back ideas to the board. So that was that formulation idea. I'm not, it is a good role in this sort of discussion. Now, what would such a committee do? Well, as a board as a whole, we have to decide what things should be advocated for. And to me, the thing that really struck out is basically a talking point with WASB, and I think is quite clear, is that advocating the state budget formula should be adjusted to account for inflation. That's one of the key points, is that when we look at the revenue cap, when we look at state aid, just make sure they track inflation, so when we say 5, 6, 7% inflation, it's not a direct hit in the school each year. And this is with attention to the what's been described by all of us, I think, WASB and Joe and many of us, as like this little cliff as the ESSER funds expire. So that's a problem we have to solve as a board. We're going to do our budget, say, a year or 2 years from now, right? There's many steps along that road about how we're going to address different budget considerations. It seems to me if we put in effort now to talk with our legislators and talk with the state and advocate for here, we're doing really well financially as a district, and yet we're still worried about what's going on. And we see other districts which are really hurting. Can we kind of talk with other districts regionally and say, as this part of the state, this matters to us, we hope we can take some action on it. I know obviously, we know Clinton was obviously on this board recently, and so the communication channels there are maybe a little bit awkward, but of course I think the whole idea is if we kind of act not just if we act as a board with kind of unity and outreach to the community, it's not about an individual politician, it's not about party politics, it's about here's what the school could benefit from in terms of funding and finding ways to advocate for that. So, I won't read through all the documents, but that's basically the idea. There's an idea there in the intention, I think, of what a strategy might look like. Like, what would this committee do? Just as thinking through, well, between now and, say, March and April, when the biennial budget goes through, what actions could we take to advocate for our cause? That cause, of course, being making sure state funding for schools is stable and isn't decreasing against inflation. So that's basically my intro. People have fostered discussion items. I'm hoping, my personal hope is we can have formulate this in a way that we all are comfortable with, and then maybe next meeting have a voting item where we say, yeah, let's make this happen, and then carry it forward throughout that next 4 to 6 months. If we decide to go this way, it would be a lot of work, but I think it would be a really important step both to establish communication channels and keep them open with legislators, and also I think with the community as a whole, right? So my last point before I actually wrap up is that if we hit financially hard times in a few years, we're going to need to really rely on the community to support us, right? So if we can build those relationships now, right? You know, build a friend before you need is what you're saying in Wall Street, right? Like make a friendship before you need it, right? So we can build relationships with community members and say, you know, here's what we're facing. Could you also talk to the legislator? Could we talk to, you know, the Booster Club, Lions Club, Optimist Club, parents who are involved in PTO and say, here's what we're looking at. Let's make sure you understand. We obviously have the January budget meeting, that'd be a good opportunity to do some of this outreach. But I think also there's people who kind of don't attend the budget meeting, don't really want to think about the budget, but may not be aware of this fiscal problem that we're facing. So we can kind of build those connections up the community. Then as a community say, yeah, we think this budget should be addressed. And it can't be addressed at local level, it has to be state level question. So that's my mission.
Can I ask a historical question of anyone who's been around longer than 2 years? What legislative advocacy for school funding has happened on behalf of our district in the past several years, and who does it? I know, Joe, you sometimes go to things. I think, Amy, you said you've gone and spoken at some certain listening sessions, but I don't know if that's for the board or as a citizen, or what is the difference?
I talk as a citizen, but also with the idea that I want to support education. Because I was in the school board, I can support education. So that's part of, you know, our code. I will say that the philosophy thing, and I think Core was on there, was really, really good and had some really good things to say. But in the past, I know that when Margaret Wright was on the board, she used to pretty much like it right, have breakfast meeting. We would have breakfast, you know, we could come to breakfast. And they would all come, you know, like it would be, you know, Clinton, maybe Jeff Smith, and you know, all the people that are in our district, whatever. And they would come and then we would ask them questions or, you know, whatever. And it was open to the public. It wasn't just school boards. And we also brought in other regional schools like Fairmont, some board members, stuff like that. So that was kind of a cool thing that we've done. We have tried to do some resolutions, pass some resolutions, but the board can never agree. So sometimes we get to a lot of ways.
And Carl, I guess I would echo some of that in the past, well, this is my 9th year, so I think, 3 bienniums, 4. The board has taken the stance that individual board members would advocate as they feel appropriate, because oftentimes when we advocate for the state budget, education certainly is important to all of us, but oftentimes individual board members may have other parts of that state budget that are concerns to them as well. But to unify efforts, especially surrounding education, WASB does a really good job with their legislative advocacy, and the board members that in my experience, have then taken that advice from WASB. They'll put out legislative alerts, they'll have calls for action, and individual board members have participated in the way that they best see fit based on their individual situation. Then me as a superintendent, I have attended each of the joint finance sessions in our area and have advocated on behalf of our school district. Also have written letters, multiple letters to joint finance committee, local representatives, etc. As an individual representing the school district. So there's a lot of different ways it could be done. I applaud you for putting some stuff together. I would caution a little bit. I think one thing we've heard for sure from the SAA, the School Administrators Alliance, but I think also WASB, is that we need to be very careful not to splinter our efforts. And I think what Abe said about sustainable funding in line with inflation, or I can't remember exactly how you said that. I think that's probably in alignment with all the groups. I can't imagine it's not. But I think it's also important to be careful not to just focus on one sole part. If in fact WASB or Dan Rossmiller, the lobbyist for WASB, if they're saying, well, actually we need to take a 3-pronged approach, higher reimbursement for special ed, things like that. So I do think you run the risk of splintering the advocacy efforts of our state organizations, depending on how it's done. Yet if you're going to have a local flavor, it's a tough balance. So I guess I hope that answers your question, Carl.
Yeah, so right now, really by policy, you speak on behalf of the district as the administrator. And anything that happens outside of this board meeting is as individuals.
That's how it's been, yes.
Per policy and per your job description, yes, right? Okay.
There are also multiple associations that we belong to as a board, Joe belongs to as an administrator, business managers that advocate for us as a group in Madison as well.
Yeah, just as a really quick follow-up to what Joe and Charlie said, I think the reason I was thinking that community structure might be helpful is because there are so many of these groups, WASB and school district association and so on, and making sure that when these emails come in or whatever, they're not just kind of lost because we're all busy, that there's actually a couple of people, whose job, who part of their role at the board is to say, here's an action item that came in from WASB. Let's make sure we follow up on it, right? And so there's actually, someone who knows it's their role, or a few people who knows their role to actually read those emails and double check them. So it doesn't become more of a background noise. I think there are lots of organizations that are doing great work, and actually being on board and supporting their efforts is really a lot of what that we could do to reform.
Remember, this is a discussion item. We can decide whether we want to bring it forward as something that we would vote on in the future, creating a committee or whatever process or whatever road we go down. One thing that I would, I guess, caution, not that I'm against advocacy, but the board many years ago went away from committees, standing committees. We can create ad hoc committees by the policy, but the standing committees they went away with, and I think for good reason. That's part of why we have the second meeting every month. My preference would be to have it be a board function rather than a committee function, but that's just my personal preference. In the advocacy toolbox that you, I'm sure, received, they talk about
School Board Association.
this right that they went through that they reviewed last week or 2 weeks ago. They talk about creating a legislative liaison to your board. In other words, somebody that's whose job it is on the board to keep track of those emails, and as you say, and bring them up, and maybe at each board member meeting, we would have a legislative topic. To me, that seems like a better way to go than creating a committee from a splintering point of view of just the board, from my point of view. So just my 2 cents on that. From an advocacy point of view, what Joe said about splintering the voices, that's one thing that they're very, very concerned about this year in Madison with the different groups, and going with the example that they use is, what if Clint came here and said, Joe, we'll give you $200 more per student in aid. Would that be okay? And Joe says, well, yeah, for us, that'd be a good thing. But for another district, that might not be a good thing. So then Clint would go back to his caucus and say, well, Menomonie, this is a good thing, so we want to do this, and it splintered everybody else. Instead of they want to go with one message to everyone and try to keep that together as much as possible as they can. And I think that makes a lot of sense for us to stay in that lane, if you will. And from my point of view, I don't know how much value there is or how much good we would do advocating in Madison ourselves. But I think the legislative breakfast or something like that to inform our representatives here, I think makes a lot of sense. Somehow we need to keep them informed. I personally have done a lot of that in the last year, and I've been surprised at how willing they are to talk, or maybe I should say to listen. I think it's been a good thing, and I think we can do some of that as well. But I think, from my point of view, I think we should start local, and keep it local from that advocacy point of view. And that would build into, depending on where the budget goes this year, if we need to go for future reference to the referendum word, we could maybe have some of that already building and that understanding in place. Because as you said, Dave, in your write-up to me in our discussion, I don't think many people really understand school finances, including, for large part, the people sitting around this table, right? It's very, very, very intricate process, and it's difficult to navigate. I was talking with John Ashley just today about it, and he said, how many people understand tertiary aid? And quick process, so.
Hey,
On a high level,
Also in March, there's, I keep my whole March, there is, what's called an advocacy day for educators and school members and superintendents can go, and then they set up appointments with your legislature staff. And I've been to it 3 or 4 times, and it's quite cool. It's like you're gonna go in, and sometimes it's the actual legislature, or sometimes it's just their staff. But they listen, they take notes, you know, and you have a nice discussion, and it's kind of cool because of it, you know, them. And again, it's like we said, building on the relationship, so that we need that, we got it.
in your example about the legislator coming to us and us telling them a number value is working on that. I understand the, how that is filtering, but then like, what are we supposed to do instead? Like, you're saying if if the legislator or representative comes to us, like, instead of us saying, yeah, let's go here, this is what we want, like, we want to have a message from like, WASB, to like, well, this is what WASB said, and this is what we're advocating for.
WASB would certainly advocate for that, right? But I think, yes, they have 3 main talking points. If we all hammer those 3 main talking points, it's likely that we're going to be more successful. If we start splintering off and saying, you know, we want more of this or that, I think it's going to be less likely that we're going to be successful, and that's what WASB is trying to say. Because in the past, to be very honest, it's been splintered, and it hasn't always been successful. So they're really trying hard this year to keep everybody to those same 3 talking points.
And I think the local part of it, Dominique, would be under those 3 main talking points, what's the local impact of them? And that's where we would want to bring that local flavor out.
Yes.
You know, if we don't have revenue limit increases that match a certain level, what's that going to mean in here? How much are we transferring out of Fund 10 to Fund 27 because we're not getting enough funding for special education? You know, we could have that number, and those kind of local facts help people understand, especially our local politicians, the impact of the state budget decision.
Like one administrator that I spoke with on the special ed transfer said, if I just got that, if I was reimbursed all, I don't have to go to referendum. I'm good. But because of that transfer that they have to make, they're going to need to go to referendum. So if we can stick to those things rather than something tangential, and that local flavor is absolutely where they want to go. Tell your story. There's a district over in the central part of the state that failed 3 referendums for operating. What are they going to do? You know,
And that's what I say to them.
they have no choice to do.
I think that's really important. Said good and not so good stuff to get, explain these things.
Rachel, you had your hand up.
Yeah, so coming back to the proposal we have right now regarding having an advocacy committee, I actually think that these points, to me, is what you had Charlie and Noah said, it really enforce the benefit that a committee like this can do. So when we talk about someone training, we talk about local flavor, I think that a committee on this board, and I understand that like this, an individual liaison might take place with the committee, and that might be something also worth discussing, but whether it's a committee or a person, a single liaison, that person would be tasked, that person on the committee would be tasked with paying close attention to what are the WASB action letters, what are the WASB talking points, communicating it to the rest of the board, right? So there's 1 or 2 people that are paying attention to those things. The rest of us are just like listening to Renee told us for that. And or communicating that out to some of these other partners that listen here, Mr. Club, details, getting that information out to share the targeted message, right? So whether it's about the funding fully funding special education, whether it's about the revenue limit, I don't see how having a committee would result in filtering. I think having that committee to keep us all sort of aware and active and prepared to act on that advocacy would be a huge benefit. I also think it would be a huge benefit, and I don't understand the purpose of this committee being to actually make Madison, as you said. I understand the purpose of the committee, maybe I'm wrong, to be acting here at home with their representatives. So, and I will also just point out, because of the way our maps are drawn here, in the Menomonie School District has at least 3, maybe 4 state assembly districts. No, there's at least 3. Yeah. Well, that's justice under. Anyway, so there's a lot of people to talk to. And a lot of people, and it's mostly, but then there's others, and so having a committee that helps us figure out what those messages are, figure out what we need to get through our members of Congress, and maybe help with helping us to get the meeting set up to make that happen, like I see this committee as being, or liaison, as potentially being really powerful to make sure that those conversations keep happening, and that not just that they happen with us as school board members, but that we help other people in the community keep power in the same.
I also think that, as individualistic as I am sometimes, I think that us three together would be very powerful. Not just in the advocacy sense, but I think it would be great for our community to see us as a board collaborate on this. To me, I see this committee as not needing to go into some like, especially if it's a priority of all of us to support these Western tenants. It's more about education and pushing the message. And for a community that historically has had a contentious board, I think it's very powerful at this point for all of them to come together. I mean, is it possible? I think so. I don't know what it's going to be. But I think that message can go farther than we realize in terms of advocacy, but also for our community.
And I would say that would be one reason why I would advocate for it to be more not a committee and the duty of the entire board, so that the board can come together, so that a committee doesn't drive the agenda and possibly go in a way that the rest of the board doesn't want the committee to go, and then we would be out there in the community again as a splintered group.
I sort of agree. I also feel like that is a fear based on, or a concern based on the work of the boards on tap versus the people who won't hear.
Sure, I get that. And I guess my reaction to that would be the fear, as you put it, and I think that maybe an appropriate word.
I am concerned.
But I think it was an accurate word, but for my feelings, because I wouldn't want it to get to that place. I would rather be safe and make it not go there, or not have it go there, than take the chance of it going there, and then here we are again. That would be the reason one reason why I would advocate for a whole board structure rather than a committee structure. I mean, some of the questions I asked Dave when he and I talked about this as an agenda item: how many people are on the committee? Who runs the committee? Is administration represented on the committee? How does the committee act on their own, or do they bring things before the board? And there's dozens of questions that we would need to get answered in my mind before we go there. Whereas if you go to the board, it's done. We could be doing it at the next meeting and move forward.
But then in the case of it being done by the full board, how do we make sure it happens when they get it done in the past? Is that you appointing one person to liaison, or one person, or is it just simply a matter of one person volunteering?
I don't think any of us understand the amount of work that this is going to be. I personally would not appoint someone that would just be me. But if somebody wanted to volunteer, that would certainly be a great thing as the liaison, if you will. If to do this right, There's a lot of people that pay thousands of dollars a month to do this, with this.
So one opportunity to have it be here, and I have no opinion yet on this at all, I'm just trying to listen and think. Would it not be possible that advocacy be added as a standing discussion item on a certain interval on our agendas, either once a month, once a quarter? That guarantees it is always on the agenda. I'm just thinking out loud.
So let me provide some reason and why, as I wrote this down, why someone would do, I went through that same thought process that you just discussed. And in my own head, thinking, like, well, since everyone should be one person, okay? And so I thought the nuts and bolts of what might happen. So first of all, there's a timeline that, we do as a MAC office, I believe we do, obviously you have to approve it, but I believe we want to actually impact the statewide decision in the current final budget process, which is a process happening between December and March. Much of it's already happened, right? But the chance to have, if you want to build a relationship, have ongoing discussions, multiple phone calls, luncheon, whatever, and of course over the holidays, right? You very quickly start hitting April when folks are actually having things. So I believe there have to be a weekly cadence of ongoing or phone call discussions, conversations, breakfasts, whatever tactics people want to use. That given the kind of roughly every 2 weeks, every 3 weeks support meeting would end up slowing that down to the point that for real actions for real influence to happen might be too long of a time. Maybe we could kind of start this back this April, that might be more. So that's one consideration I would have of the structure. In terms of workload, also, I was thinking, like, how many hours a week is this really going to be, right? In terms of thinking of this as a job. I was figuring if you think about, okay, I'm going to find the people might, the committee, the board might have an hour-long phone call with legislators. They might be organizing a lunch. They may be organizing meeting with parents who have some particular interest in patient honesty. I think one of our amazing assets this year is booster club, right? And is it possible to kind of reach out and say, hey, just so you all know, I know you're really engaged in this part of the school. Let's explain a little bit about what other parts of the school are looking at and what our budget looks like, right? And just kind of a presentation to the groups. That would be something that they kind of do arrange and have context and make sure that there's that sort of a good discussion follow-up. I was thinking, you're looking at probably 6 to 9 hours a week of actual work, right? And that's a lot, like you said, to add to someone's plate. So if you have a couple people, that's not a big deal. So that's, but then of course, it's one concern, right? But that's kind of why I settled on that. But I totally agree with both points about committee as a whole versus an individual. It was all completely valid points. I think navigating as A-wise doesn't have.
If you're going to do this right and give good information to the legislators, you're going to be talking about 6 to 9 hours a day for us. Because you have to make, yes, it'll take you an hour to make that appointment to have lunch and then a 2-hour lunch. But you have to be prepared with your talking points and you have to understand school finance and you've got to meet with Joe and you've got to meet with Leah for a long period of time and take them away from their regular jobs doing that to be able to make that presentation in a cognizant way so that that legislator understands what the real effect on our district is. It's a big deal.
You're talking about something that is like really effective lobbying and advocacy, and I think you're right, that is a big deal. I think that there's another, I think what I'm talking about, and I'm not sure what you're talking about, but, when I think about advocacy, like, yes, and that's what we pay WASB, that's why we're members of WASB, that's why we're members of but that's why we're members of all of these organizations, that's why we pay this money, because they do this very clearly and very right. But I think what's also powerful is for our assembly representatives and our state senate representatives to hear from individuals, hear from school board members, hear from school board as a whole, hear from parents, hear from community members, that they're paying attention, that they care about these things, that they want, and they don't, it doesn't have to be a full presentation on our entire school's, you know, financial status. It could be those 3 talking points. It could be, we have a committee or a liaison that takes this information from Waterview, gives the talking points to other members, empowers us to take those talking points to our members of Congress, to our members of the legislature. And I think that can happen at that smaller level and be really important and effective. So I think that we don't want to let the daunting idea of what really effective lobbying is to stop us from doing some advocacy. Because I think we're in a moment where the fiscal cliff is real and we have a huge, the burden feels, the pressure feels greater in this moment than it probably has in the last moment. Well, I don't know. The pressure feels great in this moment. It feels like there's something that we are all coalesced around that maybe we weren't in previous years. And I think that it's meaningful to act even in these smaller ways.
I agree. I think there has to be something to be done, whether it's just, an update at a meeting, like one meeting a month, something. I think that's really important for us to know what we need to do, how we can contact, what we can contact. I think that what you're saying, Charlie, yeah, that could be right, but let's see, at least, just because it does we talk to police, as the board as a committee, either way, please. The other thing is, there's lots of people that love legislative stuff. I'm sure Amy does too.
Like someone said, love it.
But I love to read, and I read all these things, and I pay attention, and whatever. I'm not volunteering necessarily to take over all that, but I'm interested in maybe not everybody has an interest. And so when we talk about the full board, some people may not want to do that. That's why it's important to have committee or some people report and say this was happening so that they can. I mean, I don't want anybody to have spend 6 to 9 hours a day or, unless they want.
I agree that, you do want to do this right, and it will take work and effort, but we're gonna do it, obviously now is the time to do it, and we're talking about this specifically, and I feel like this is important for us to take action, and also a lot better if we do have to go to referendum at some point, knowing that we did the most that we could. To avoid that, I also think it will, I think our community would know better about it too, but I mean, that's what we want to do. But for me personally, it's like, we talk about there's no cliff, and this is, I mean, I sort of feel like, this is one of the most actionable things to do as an elected member, is to do the best we can.
I completely agree. This is if we're going to do this, this is the time to do it. I, however, fear us not doing it as well as we could, and it not coming off well, and then hurting us, not helping us when it comes time for a referendum or something like that. So that's where I and then again, back to the discussion about us as a board and our inter-board relationship. I haven't heard much from this side of the table yet. In fact, I haven't heard anything from this side of the table yet.
Well,
Any
I have a couple of thoughts. And I hear what you guys are saying, and in theory, it's a great idea. However, in practice, I think that we were all uniquely elected, probably by different constituents in our community, because we all have different values and different relationships within the community and things like that. And I think, you 3 on a committee would probably, I as legislative updates and things are coming forward from WASB, what would interest you or what you think is important might be completely different than what we think is important. So I think having a committee, because I certainly think there are way more legislative things going on than what you could probably bills going through and bills coming in and different things like that. So I mean, I feel like individually, as something comes up that we think is important that directly affects our board, and we talk to the president, and we talk to district administrator, and we feel like it's something that the board needs to know, I would like to continue the process that we're doing now, because we're oversight, and Joe is writing letters, and he is communicating, and he is part of the superintendent's alliance, and they are working on this, and they have been working on this, and when it was at Dan Rossler that spoke at the regional meeting, he indicated all of those things, that they are working on it, and as we have concerns and as we have questions, to contact them, to work with them, and so your question might be different than what my question might be. You, just like our support statement, some of us supported it and some of us didn't. What we see for funding, and where we spend it, we kind of all have a different sort of philosophy. So I am in support of keeping the board united and not breaking one into a committee and doing what Charlie said. I also think as part of the toolkit that philosophy does have on there, one of the recommendations is discuss at least one legislative issue in each meeting to kind of keep people abreast of what's going on. And if I have a question or concern, I just contact my executive, and I live in the Washington system, and I do those sorts of things. I don't think that I need to do that. But I hear what you're saying.
I take that point in general, like as it would be broadly about legislation, but when we look at the whole thing for us right now, it's really about the budget. And I think this budget is something we can take action on, that's happening, but I don't think that as a board.
So you weren't at that meeting when he did discuss the budget, and he went over the figures and how this isn't a problem that just all of a sudden arose. This has been going on for years where the funding each year gets smaller and smaller because of inflation, and that it hasn't gone up with inflation and different things like that. And so they're very aware of it. They are advocating for us. Our superintendents have been advocating. I mean, there's a lot going on, I think, that maybe we don't all understand or know about, but I think we need to stay together as a unified board and not break out into a committee. And I think support, what our professional administration is doing, because they're all looking at these things too. And so having someone from a committee going and advocating something different than maybe say what Joe advocated for our district would send a mixed message out. So I just think that we also do. That's just kind of.
Deal or not? Comments?
Oh, really? I really like what I heard you say, which I thought it made a lot of sense. It was just great, and you should bring out one item once a month, 2 months, that committee, or when it was like first week. Which is better, but bring that to the board, and to highlight it, and to give our support, and maybe give some direction to the superintendent. I don't understand the division part. It seems to me to be very, I think with the best construction on it, it could be a uniform factor. And keep it simple. If I heard that. Keep it simple.
One thing I'd like to say is, yes, volunteers are helping advocating for us. And I think what is hard for me is when, and here's a tough task for when everybody gets out. But we have an organization that we belong to, they know each other, and they advocate for us. I feel like sometimes some of us, or in task force, did a great the parallels. You know, we're like national school. Talk about that. So I guess, you know, what I'm saying is it would be nice if not only could we be united as a board, but united as to what philosophy is doing for us. If that makes sense. I mean, I know we all have our own personal issues, but if we're gonna pay an organization money to help us, then we should support them.
Thank you for the question. Because in my mind, I see what we're asking to do and what WASB's doing and what our superintendent is doing as all the same thing. Maybe, is in the policy position in the bullet point, that is a summary of WASB's 3 pillars that we.
It is one of them. I think maybe that, you know, was there Tuesday, perhaps too early, right, versus WASB has additional points about targeted aid for students with disabilities, for, they have other points about, you know, the September 1st start date is a concern of theirs as well. So WASB has about a 3/4 page list of items that they are currently advocating for, basically executive board of one. Since, you know, the thing that was in my mind when I wrote this was that budget item, I guess I took their budget item and I didn't much like their grammar, so I rewrote it a little bit. But it's the same as their first point on the budget section of that document. Yeah, so that, and in terms of, you know, the coordination, I guess what I was envisioning the role of such a committee to be, would be to exactly coordinate that messaging, to talk with the administrator, talk with people at WASB, and make sure that we are playing a supportive role to those ongoing activities. I definitely hear what you're saying, Angie, and I think that, to me, actually, one of the great strengths of a structure, of having an ongoing structure on advocacy, would be that we do have different subcommittees that we're all members of, right? And so you can actually get those committees together about school budget questions and say, and like I have not yet been involved in athletics, which is a huge part of Menomonie school activities. My kids are too small, I haven't been part of it, but you two start coming out, right? And have deep connections to, you know, the parents and coaches who have been raising, you know, incredible funds and tons of volunteer work for those groups. And to bring that, you know, to bring in these different groups of the whole school district area to say, yeah, like we hope the schools can have stable funding in a reliable way. I think that'd be just an amazing, powerful message to.
Mark, Dave, Dad?
I don't know what to think about it, really. I think I applaud you for your efforts, although I heard Rachel say when we put this together, so I don't know exactly who put it together. And you just wrote it, but all of them put it together.
I don't know.
But I think it's very, I think the intentions are good. But I kind of align with what Charlie and Angie said. I mean, here's my fear, and here's one thing that I don't want. I don't want a subcommittee speaking on behalf of myself being on the board. I don't want any part of that. And I wouldn't assume that you guys would want that either. And I'm not saying that that's what this would do. I'm not saying that at all. But I'm kind of on board with, can we do this as a board? You know, I mean, I think we can. I think it's possible with some of the ideas that were thrown out. And I don't have 6 to 9 hours to invest with a family and a job and whatever. And I don't know how anybody on the board could have that kind of time and not take away from one of those things, work or family, and why you want to do that. I mean, I get that this is all about education of the kids, but I guess I'm on board with let's try to do it as a board and not split off.
Would it be
into a subgroup.
So it sounds like, this was just kind of opening discussion, right? So would it be reasonable to try to kind of rewrite the, before, my hope is that we can have some sort of plans that things actually happen. Whether, if it's not a committee, that's fine, if some of our structure is better for us as a group, that's fantastic. I want it to work, right? And I want the work to get done, honestly, right? So, if keeping in mind to kind of maybe scrap or rewrite that, the thing on the proposal for committee and just say, here are some things to get on board and as a board, and, at the very least, if we're going to set up personal meetings with legislators, figure out, who's gonna schedule those meetings when they're gonna be, and just make sure we have a plan that we talk about as a board. Is that, so is kind of reworking of this in that form, or is more as a whole?
Hold that thought.
Yeah.
Carl, do you agree with that?
I think there's benefits to both approaches. I don't think being better advocates as a board is a bad idea. I think in general, if folks who have concerns can talk through them here, I think we would all agree we'd like to see reimbursement keep up with inflation so we can run our school. We can get down into smaller details that we can pick over, but hopefully we all hope that there's enough money to run our school that we don't have to go ask our district for referendum just to operate. If that does come to pass, I hope, that we as a board and as a district have done a good job educating our community, so that's not the first time they've heard of that there's an issue with school funding, because our community is the ones who are electing all the people who make the votes in Madison, right? So part of me feels like the real juice to the squeeze is just keeping our community educated on what's going on that affects them, how it would affect them, whether that's through the board, whether that's through our administrator. I think that you're discussing, do you pare down the committee? I think there's too much here to do well quickly. I mean, my big concern is I don't disagree. I think that with the way the legislature is made up right now, pragmatically, I don't think some extra conversations with us is going to change what's going to happen in funding. I mean, that's pragmatically speaking, but that doesn't mean it's not worth trying and setting the cycle of communication and relationship one way or the other. If I support something, I think it needs to be super simple. Start with a thing. Everyone needs to be on board with it, not start this out as some approach that people have major hesitation over. Otherwise, nothing will happen. We'll just get a fight over it and be done.
Okay, so
Velocity is also mentioned that, if they don't hear from us, if they were satisfied with the company's work. That's another thing I heard to say.
can I wrap this up then? We'll rewrite it, we'll bring it back in a different type of structure with some bullet points to it. Dave, if you want to do that, that's great. I'd be more than happy to sit down and help you with it so that we can do it as a group. I'd be more than happy to do that. Just let me know. And we'll bring back a proposal to the next meeting in December. That makes sense?
Will it come back as an action item or as a discussion?
Put it as action. You don't have to take action if you don't, the board doesn't feel it's ready. That's my suggestion.
Right? Okay, let's move on. Review the process for evaluating the district administrator.
Also, directors, you're welcome to stay, but if you guys want to go, you're welcome.
The first, then they'll all follow, right? Who's going? All right. Excuse me. So we evaluated our administrator back in July, and at that point in time, we needed to decide on what leadership standards we were going to evaluate for this year, and we didn't do that. Because we didn't do that, my proposal would be that we keep the same that we had last year, because of where we are in the year. And that was, standards 1, 4, and 9, which I'll go back now to those. Mission, vision, and core values, curriculum, instruction, and assessment, and operations and management. At this point in time, I don't think personally that would be fair to change that. But, I don't know, does anybody have any heartburn over that? No, there's not one, but I will. Mission, number 1 is mission, vision, and core values. Let me verify, it's number 4, right? I don't read it wrong. Number 4, number 9. Number 1 is mission, vision, core values. Number 4, curriculum, instruction, and assessment. Number 9, operations and management.
I think that's fine, but we also gave us extra goals for them too, so we also discussing those, I would imagine, to make sure that there's progress, correct?
I feel like those
Our-
goals were within.
Yeah, the work plan. I don't remember any specific extra goals other than the work plan.
No, we have listed goals.
Yeah, we have this goals like, about, I don't want to say anything about it.
All right.
I personally didn't like our review process. I felt like our strategic plan, it wasn't clear when we weren't under strategic plan or his job description. And I feel like those are generally what you hold your employees accountable for. Like, for example, like we talked about, I think at the community meeting I did that, like he does really well in the ones that we picked out. So it was kind of hard to, like, I think, I don't know.
I would, no, this is open session. I would submit that it's too late to change the tool now. And if we change the tool, how many tools have you had? Like 8 out of 9 years? I would not advocate at this point. We need to run this, let it run its course, let us at least get used to it. I don't think we're only 6 months into it.
We updated your job description last spring, right?
We did.
Yeah.
So I don't think we want to go there at this point in time. I understand what you're saying, and maybe we could work on bringing some of those into the tool that we've chosen. But I for one, would not advocate changing again. Maybe the third tool I've been involved in.
We spend money.
Right. And so, at the January meeting, we will do the mid-year assessment. We need to look at those goals that they're speaking of. Because I can't find them, I gotta look at it.
I believe in we had the written discussion of the different items.
Yeah.
There's
I'll find it. All right. Apologies, I can't find it, I don't recall those, but I'm not saying they don't exist, I just don't recall them.
I'll see if I can find it. I'll see if I can.
I think that makes sense in terms of keeping, setting the standards for the next year.
Any other thoughts on that? Right. Review extracurricular staff contract requests.
So that's a standing item, unless there's any questions, just for the board's information.
Question?
Head wrestling was listed at 1,936, is that for the entire season?
Every sport is provided a certain number of points, and the head coach can determine how he wants to split the points up. So
So
depending,
they could split the points, that's, I think.
Or did.
That in class, okay. So the head wrestling coach maybe was assigned 10 points, but decided to split some of them off and have more assistants.
Correct.
Is that correct?
each sport or each activity is allotted a certain number of points. And there is, yeah, gosh, 4 or 5 years ago, we went through and developed a brand new system that weighted different sports based on their needs and based on their unique needs. And then they were allotted a certain number of points. So the head coach works with the activities director to kind of divide out those points.
That was similar to the old days. And the only other question was that the assistant roughing coach was taking over $300 more than the head coach. I thought that was a bit peculiar, and that was Megan. And
That there might be a,
not to be sexist,
no, the head coaching, last year the responsibilities were split, but this year we do have one specific head coach. I will need to, there might be a typo with that, and we can correct that. Jenny and I will work together
yeah,
on
it's
that.
making
to make sure.
it's making an assistant wrestling coach.
Correct, yes, she's an assistant wrestling coach.
So you think this report needs to be reviewed?
Potentially, yes.
Okay. We'll check it out, get a revised.
As head coach divvies it up, would it be possible that he would allot her more points than himself? Possible, right?
Like a time piece.
It's possible.
Based on what she's doing.
Because if they're on staff anyway.
Right.
We need to take a look at this. Actually, I think what you're looking at, Dale, is the head wrestling coach for the middle school.
Oh,
That's what you're looking at.
so that was the technical.
That's
Is that high school?
That's not the high school. But
Okay.
I was gonna say that didn't add up to
Well,
me.
that helps explain it too.
That
Thank
is
you.
the middle school head coach.
Also, the last one was the middle school.
No, the Lubeck is the middle school.
Correct. That is correct.
Right, so there is.
What? No.
Yeah, it's
Yes,
just-
it's
it's high school.
Not MMS.
Oh, yeah. Yep, that's it. So it should say MMS, yeah.
That was where my confusion is.
Thank you. I missed that.
And no context, like.
All right, any other questions on the extracurricular staff contracts? Moving on, items related to the next meeting dates. QIC on the 5th, reconsideration committee on the 8th, regular board meeting on the 12th. Won't read all the rest of it, but remember those committee meetings for those of you that are on the committees.
It is worth pointing out, I think we mentioned it earlier, there's only one board meeting in December.
I want to see who showed up Monday night.
If there are more issues, a special meeting could be called, but right now we have one board meeting scheduled, December 12th.
We've got history class.
Yes, and before we break, I think it's worthwhile. You go ahead.
Thank you for having us. And for sticking around.
Yeah.
Show the cookies.
Yeah, Principal Shannon Branch for welcoming the board to Wakanda Elementary, providing a tour, providing some treats. Also, at our table, we had some nice little cards from the students, and an ornament from the students, very nice. And with this being the last of our traveling road show, it's been great, and I think it's something that's very worthwhile to do once in a while. I don't know if board members recognize how much work it was for us to do this. I mean, Jenny did more than anybody, but I mean, all the custodians of the building, getting things set up, the technology, the filming of the board meetings, the directors, it's been a lot of extra work. So I'm really glad we did it. I'm really looking forward to being back home at the AFC for our next meeting. But most of all, I'm grateful for all the hard work of our people who made this work. So thank you.
I echo that, in that, it's great to go back and be in the meeting room, but this was getting out and visiting the buildings was a very, very worthwhile, even though Jenny may doubt it, but the rest of us, it was very, very useful and to see each building. I've been in each building, but it's been a long time, so.
Well, I hope all the building staff, recognize that we paid attention on the tours, not just this building, but really we're looking at all the things that they're doing out there, and it's great to see them.
All right, with that, we would entertain a motion to adjourn. Angie and Amy, Rachel?